The night was heavy with mist and silence, and Captain Elias Ward pushed forward through the thick alien jungle with each breath feeling heavier than the last. The air itself seemed alive with strange noises, soft clicks, deep growls, and distant roars that echoed between the twisted trees. He had been stranded here for only a week, but already the world felt endless, dangerous, and ancient. It was a place where humans did not belong, and every moment he stayed alive felt like a stolen gift. His boots sank into the damp soil, his flashlight weak against the shadows. The forest canopy swallowed most of the moonlight from the twin moons above, and only streaks of silver broke through the branches, giving everything a pale, ghostly glow. He carried his pulse rifle ready, though he knew even the strongest human weapons sometimes meant nothing against the creatures of this world. He had seen beasts with claws like steel talons and scales. Like armor, he had seen eyes staring back at him in the dark before fading away, as if deciding he was not worth the effort. And each night he wondered how much longer luck would stay on his side. Sound reached him suddenly, a low, broken groan that did not belong to the trees or the wind. It was deep, too deep, almost shaking the ground beneath his feet. He froze, heart pounding, eyes darting through the mist. His instincts screamed run, but something else kept him rooted. He heard it again, the sound of pain, not rage, not hunger, but raw agony. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to snap a branch or stir the thick ferns around him. The groaning grew louder as he moved closer until the mist thinned, and he saw it, a massive shape lying across the ground. Blood glistened black under the pale moonlight. Thick plates of armor-like hide cracked and torn. Its body shuddered with every breath it took. The creature was enormous, twice his height, when lying down, with 4 powerful limbs, ending in clawed hands and a jaw filled with sharp teeth. One wing-like appendage twitched, broken bones jutting out at odd angles. Ilias froze his body, screaming to turn back, yet he could not. His mind whispered one thing: this thing should be dead, or it should be trying to kill him, yet it did neither. Its yellow eyes flickered open, glowing faintly, and for a moment their gazes locked instead of rage. Elias saw pain and confusion in those eyes, and a question: why did this fragile human not flee? He swallowed, hard gripping his rifle tighter and whispering under his breath, "Stupid, stupid. What are you doing?" He knew this was madness. A wounded predator was more dangerous than a healthy one, but he also saw something he could not ignore. Desperation, the kind of sound he had once heard from a fellow soldier dying on the battlefield, a plea more than a growl. Crouched low, keeping his distance, and studied the wounds, gashes deep enough to split through its armored hide. Scorch marks burned across its chest, as if some weapon had struck it recently. Arrows or projectiles of a kind he had not seen before jutted from its side. It had been hunted not by accident, but with intent. This was no natural fight. Someone wanted this beast dead and had nearly succeeded. His hand trembled as he lowered the rifle and reached for his survival kit. He had bandages, herbs, chemicals, nothing designed for something of this size or biology. But still something. The creature stirred when he moved, and he froze again, holding his breath, waiting for it to lash out, but instead it only gave another guttural groan, its body sagging back against the earth as if surrendering. Elias whispered, "Easy, easy. I am not here to hurt you." His voice sounded small in the wide jungle, but he said it anyway. As much for himself as for the beast, he crept closer, inch by inch, his boots sinking softly into the soil. The yellow eyes tracked him, but the jaw did not snap. The claws did not rise. He pulled one of the arrows free quickly before fear could stop him. The beast gave a violent shudder, a hiss escaping its throat, and Elias stumbled back, rifle raised, but still it did not attack. Its body slumped weaker than before. He forced himself forward again, his hands shaking as he began working faster, pulling out arrows and sealing wounds with foam. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. He gagged, but pressed on. Minutes stretched into hours, the mist closing around them, as if hiding this strange act from the rest of the world. Elias worked with focus and fear. Each movement could be his last. But slowly, the bleeding slowed, the beast's breath grew steadier. Its eyes never left him, glowing like lanterns in the dark. Once, when he pressed against a wound, its claw rose quickly. He almost fired, but instead the claw lowered and rested in the dirt beside him, as though warning, not threatening. Something strange passed between them, an understanding he could not name. When he finished, Elias sat back, breathing hard, sweat soaking his shirt. He looked at the towering creature, half expecting it to spring up and tear him apart instead. It let out a low rumble, not hostile, but almost like a sigh it lowered. Its head closer to him, nostrils flaring as if memorizing his scent, Ilias's heart hammered, but he did not move. He only whispered again, "Easy, you are safe for now." The beast blinked slowly and then closed its eyes. Drifting into a rough sleep, the jungle around them had gone silent, the usual chorus of strange voices gone replaced. Only by the heavy breathing of the wounded giant, Elias felt the silence pressing down on him thick and strange. He knew predators were near, always near in this place, but none approached. Not while this beast lay here. Maybe they feared it even in weakness, maybe they feared something else. He leaned back against a tree, exhaustion finally washing over him. He should leave, he told himself, walk away before it wakes and remembers what you are, but his legs refused. He stayed, rifle across his lap. Eyes half closed, the image of those glowing eyes still burned in his mind. This was madness, and yet it felt like the only sane thing he had done since crash landing on this cursed world. Then the sound came again, but not from the beast, not from the jungle. It was a whisper of movement, faint, heavy, and multiplied. Elias sat up, pulse quickening. Shadows moved among the trees, tall shapes watching, red eyes glimmering in the dark, dozens. Maybe more. He lifted his rifle ready, but none of them advanced. Instead, they stood still, silent gazes fixed on him and the wounded beast beside him. His throat tightened, cold fear crawling down his spine. He had not saved one creature, he had walked into the gaze of an entire pack, and every one of them seemed to be waiting, watching, measuring him. Elias's hand clenched the rifle tighter, but he knew firing a single shot now meant death. They could kill him in seconds. He looked back at the wounded beast and then at the glowing red eyes circling closer. Something shifted in the air, not the feeling of prey about to be devoured, but something stranger. Something that made the hairs on his neck rise, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath. Waiting to see what came next, the mist hung low between the trees, and Elias could feel the weight of every stare around him. The red eyes glowed from the shadows, dozens of them circling him, and the wounded beast that lay at his side. He tightened his grip on the rifle, sweat running down his back. His instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The jungle was thick, the ground uneven, and the creatures moved like shadows, silent and unbroken. The air was too quiet, too heavy. Even the normal calls of the night had gone missing. As though the entire forest knew something was about to happen. The beast he had saved stirred its massive chest, rising and falling in labored breaths. Its wounds still raw, but no longer spilling blood. Its yellow eyes opened again, glowing faint. In the moonlight, when it saw the others, it gave a weak rumble, not of anger but of recognition. The red eyes blinked once, then twice, and slowly the shapes began to step forward out of the mist. Their bodies massive, like the wounded one, but each slightly different. Some had larger horns, some longer claws, some were covered in plates of bone like natural armor. They walked on four limbs, but stood tall on their back legs when needed, towering over Elias, their breath steaming in the cool night. Elias's heart raced. He lifted the rifle. But every instinct told him firing would mean his end. They could crush him before the second shot, so he froze, body tense, finger hovering near the trigger. One of the creatures, the largest, stepped forward. Its eyes burning like coals, it lowered its head close to the ground, its massive jaw opening just slightly as if tasting the air. Elias thought for sure this was the end, but the beast did not strike. Instead, it looked at the wounded one and made a sound, a low, deep call that shook Ilias's bones. The wounded beast answered weakly, its body trembling, and then the pack moved closer, surrounding both human and beast. Elias felt trapped, his back pressed against the tree behind him. His mind raced. Should he run? Should he stand still? Should he show fear or strength? The massive creature in front of him lowered its head again. This time its gaze fixed on Elias, not on the wounded one. Elias could see his reflection in those burning eyes, small, fragile, weak compared to the towering predator. The silence stretched until his breath came in short bursts. Finally, he whispered without even knowing why, "I did not come to hurt it, I helped it." The words sounded foolish in his own ears, as though These creatures could not possibly understand him, but something shifted. The beast's head tilted slightly as if curious. It moved closer until Elias could smell its breath, hot and thick with the scent of blood and earth. The clawed hand lifted and lowered again, not striking, but resting in the dirt, inches from his boots. Elias held his ground, though his knees threatened to buckle. Then the strangest thing happened. The red eyes around him began to blink. One by one, the creatures lowered their heads, not in attack, but in something he could not explain. Submission. No, not submission, something else. Acknowledgement. They had seen what he had done. They had seen him save one of their own, and now they were deciding what he was. The wounded beast tried to rise, its body shaking, but with effort it managed to push itself up onto its front limbs. Elias moved quickly to steady it. Without thinking, placing his hand against its armored side, the beast rumbled and stayed upright. Supported by him, the pack reacted. Immediately, more of them stepped forward, their claws brushing the dirt but not striking. Instead, they let out low calls like an unspoken language, the air filled with sound, deep growls, hisses, and roars that blended together. Elias could not understand the words, if they were words at all, but the meaning was clear. Oh, this was not random, this was not chaos, this was communication, and he was caught in the middle. Elias's breath came fast, his heart pounding, but he forced himself to stand tall. He knew one wrong move could break this fragile balance. He glanced at the leader, the massive beast who had not taken its eyes off him. He could almost feel the weight of judgment in its stare, as if the creature was trying to see into his soul. The silence stretched once more, and then the leader gave a roar so loud the trees themselves shook. Birds scattered into the sky. The ground trembled beneath Elias's boots. His ears rang, but he did not fall. He kept his stance, rifle lowered. Though ready, his gaze locked on the glowing eyes before him. The pack answered the roar, their voices thundering together. In the night, a chorus of power that rolled through the jungle. The wounded beast leaned heavily against Elias, its head lowering until it almost touched the ground, and Elias realized what had just happened. He was no longer just a stranger in their territory. He was part of something larger. He had been tested in a way he could not understand, and he had not failed. The pack began to move, shifting around him, some circling others, fading back into the mist, but none attacked, none even brushed against him. The leader turned with slow grace, its massive tail cutting through the ferns, and began to walk deeper into the jungle. The others followed, their glowing eyes vanishing one by one into the fog, until only the wounded beast remained beside him. It nudged him with its massive head, almost knocking him off balance, then began to limp after the others. Elias stood frozen for several heartbeats, then forced his legs to move. He followed, keeping his rifle ready, though his heart told him it would not help here. The jungle swallowed them as they moved, branches scraping his arms, mist clinging to his skin. Every sound seemed louder, his own footsteps, his own breathing. He felt as though he had been swallowed whole by something he could not fight. Time stretched. The pack moved with purpose, deeper and deeper into the jungle, until the trees opened into a wide clearing, moonlight spilling down like silver water. The beasts gathered here, their bodies forming a circle, their eyes glowing in the night. Elias stood at the edge, unsure if he had walked into a ritual or a trap. The leader stood at the center, towering above all the others. It let out a call so deep the ground seemed to shake. The others answered, lowering their heads. Elias stood trembling, unsure of what to do. Then the wounded beast, the one he had saved, pushed itself to the center of the circle, its body weak but its eyes blazing with light. It roared, though the sound was broken and rough, and then it turned toward Elias, the yellow eyes locking on him. It lowered itself to the ground, claws digging into the dirt, its head bowing low. The pack answered in unison, their voices filling the clearing, echoing into the sky. Elias's chest tightened. He realized in horror and awe that this was not just a gathering. This was a decision. They were not going to kill him. They were not going to chase him out. Instead, they were doing something far stranger. They were accepting him not as prey, not as intruder, but as something else entirely his. Hands shook. He whispered again, though he knew they could not understand. Why me? His voice cracked in the night. The beasts gave no answer, only their endless roar that shook the stars above. Elias stood in the center of their gaze, heart racing, his mind unable to understand what was happening, yet deep inside, some part of him knew this moment was changing everything. He was no longer just a survivor on a strange world. He was something more, something that terrified him, even as it pulled him. Deeper into the mystery of these alien beasts, Elias stood in the clearing, surrounded by the circle of glowing eyes. The sound of their roars still shaking in his chest. The pack had gone silent now. Only the breath of dozens of massive creatures filled the night. He felt small, fragile, his rifle heavy in his hands, but useless against so many. The wounded beast lay in the center, its head lowered as though presenting him to the others. The leader watched, unmoving eyes burning like fire. His instincts screamed at him to flee, yet his body refused to move, every muscle locked by the weight of their stare. Silence grew longer every second, stretching into eternity. The pack waited for something Elias did not understand. Then slowly the leader stepped forward, its claws digging into the earth with each massive stride. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, though he knew firing meant instant death. The leader stopped just in front of him, its head lowering until those glowing eyes were inches from his face. The heat of its breath washed over him, hot and heavy, smelling of blood and smoke. Its jaw opened, slightly rows of teeth glinting in the moonlight. Elias held his ground, barely his knees threatening to give way. The beast lifted its claw and brought it down beside him. The ground split under the weight of the strike, but the claw stopped short of his boots. He flinched, heart hammering. The creature did not attack. Instead, it rumbled deep in its chest, the sound vibrating. Through the clearing, Elias realized with growing terror that this was not an attack. It was a challenge, though. Leader turned slightly and pointed its claw to the trees, then back to Elias. Again, the meaning was not spoken, yet clear enough. Prove yourself. The pack's eyes burned brighter, their low growls building like thunder. Elias understood if he failed this trial, whatever it was, he would not live to see the morning. He swallowed dry air, his mind racing. He whispered to himself, steady, steady, think. Like a soldier, think like a survivor. He looked where the claw had pointed, the dark jungle waiting, full of shadows and unknown threats. The leader stepped back and roared, the sound echoing for miles. Elias flinched, but his body moved almost on its own. His boots carried him toward the tree line as if he had no choice. The jungle swallowed him, the clearing fading behind into silence. The mist thickened around him, the noises of the night returning, strange cries, howls, clicks, and hisses. Elias gripped his rifle close, eyes darting for any sign of danger. He had no idea what he was supposed to find or face, but he knew this was a test, and failure meant death, not just his, but perhaps the beast's. He had just begun to understand. Branches clawed at his arms and face, roots threatened to trip him with every step. His flashlight cut a narrow beam through the fog, each tree twisting into monstrous shapes in the dark. Every sound made his breath quicken. He forced himself to move slower, quieter. He remembered the way the beasts moved through the jungle, almost soundless, and he tried to mimic them, though his clumsy human steps snapped twigs underfoot. Then he heard it, a low growl from somewhere ahead. His body froze, his finger brushing the trigger of his rifle. The growl came again, deeper, closer. Elias lowered himself behind a thick fern, holding his breath, his heart thundering. The mist shifted, and a shape moved through the trees, larger than any beast he had yet seen, its back ridged with bone, its mouth dripping with saliva, its red eyes burning like molten stone. It moved on 6 legs each, ending in long hooked claws. The ground seemed to tremble with every step it took. Elias realized this was no member of the pack. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The creature stopped, its head turning toward his hiding spot. Elias dared not breathe. Its nostrils flared, sniffing the air. And then it roared, a sound so loud Elias's ears rang. He stumbled back and fired his rifle. The blast lit up the jungle, a bolt of energy striking the creature's armored side. It barely flinched, the beast charged trees, snapping under its weight. Elias turned and ran, his boots slamming against the wet ground, breath tearing from his lungs, the roars chasing him closer and closer. He ducked under a branch, leapt over a root, and spun around, firing again. This time aiming for its eyes. The blast caught the beast across the face. It screamed, staggering, but did not fall. Elias ran again, searching desperately for anything that could give him an edge. Then his eyes caught movement above thick vines hanging from a tree long and heavy. An idea sparked in his mind, crazy, but his only chance. He sprinted for the tree-firing one. Last shot at the monster to slow it down, then he leaped, grabbing the vine with both hands. His body swung upward. Just as the beast lunged, snapping its jaws shut where he had stood, its teeth crushed bark, and splintering wood as it slammed into the tree. Elias climbed higher, boots slipping but arms. Pulling desperately, the beast clawed at the trunk, roaring in frustration. He aimed down and fired again. This time at its open mouth, the blast struck deep inside, smoke and fire bursting out. The beast shrieked, thrashing wildly before collapsing against the base of the tree, its massive body twitching before falling still. Elias hung there panting, his arms shaking, his whole body drenched in sweat. He had survived. But barely. He climbed down slowly, boots hitting the ground beside the smoldering corpse of the creature, its blood black and steaming against the soil. His chest heaved as he looked at it. He had faced death and somehow lived. He realized this must have been the trial. Survive, the jungle survive. The predator proved himself to the pack. The silence that followed was short-lived. Shadows shifted around him. Red eyes glowing in the mist, one by one, the beasts of the pack emerged from the trees they had been watching all along. Elias raised his rifle again, though his body was too weak to fight. He expected them to strike, but instead they stood in a circle. Their eyes glowing, their heads lowering, the leader stepped forward and let out a thunderous roar, this time not of challenge, but of acknowledgement. Pack answered as one, the sound echoing through the jungle, shaking the leaves. Elias stood trembling. Caught between fear and awe, the leader lowered its head until its glowing eyes locked with his again. This time Elias saw not judgment, but recognition. The leader rumbled deep in its chest, and for the first time Elias understood without words. He was no longer a stranger, no longer prey. He had passed the trial, and now he was something else entirely. The beasts surrounded him not as hunters, but as witnesses to what had just happened, their eyes watching as though he had been reborn in there. Sight, the wounded beast limped from the clearing, its body still weak, but its gaze strong. When it reached him, it lowered its head against his shoulder, a gesture so alien, yet so strangely familiar. Elias placed a hand against its rough hide, his voice barely a whisper. "I do not know why, but I will not betray this." The jungle around them rumbled with the sound of the beast's answering call. Elias knew his life was no longer his own. He had crossed a line. There was no turning back. The pack had tested him and accepted him, and now, whatever came next, he would face it not as a lost human, but as the strange, impossible leader chosen by beasts from another world. The jungle was quiet after the trial, but Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. Every step the beasts moved beside him, their massive bodies blending into the mist, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. The wounded one still limped, but kept close to him, its breath heavy yet steady. The leader strode ahead like a shadow of stone. Elias followed, unsure if he was prisoner, guest, or something stranger. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low growls and the soft rumble of creatures moving through the undergrowth. Hours passed and the jungle began to thin. The trees spreading wider, the ground sloping downward until they came to a clearing. Elias stopped, his breath catching at the sight. Before him, the earth opened into a vast valley. Far below, ridges of black stone rising like jagged teeth, rivers of pale light winding through the ground, glowing faintly under the twin moons. The pack moved to the edge, their eyes reflecting silver fire. Elias stared in awe, his heart tightening with a strange feeling he had not felt since leaving Earth Wonder. But then the air changed, a vibration pulsed through the ground, not natural, not alive, but mechanical. Elias knew the sound instantly. His blood ran cold. He had not heard that sound since the crash. It came again, deeper, louder. The sky above flickered with movement, shadows sliding across the moons. Elias lifted his gaze and saw them, ships, long dark shapes gliding like predators across the heavens, their lights stabbing the mist beams, sweeping the jungle. Elias's chest tightened. He whispered, "No, not here." The beasts stirred, restless, their growls rising, their eyes turning to the sky. The leader roared loud and deep, the sound carrying across the valley. The pack answered, their voices thundering together. But Elias's fear grew sharper. He knew those ships. They were not human, not friendly, not explorers. They belonged to the empire that had hunted and destroyed countless colonies across the stars. He had seen their cruelty, he had watched them burn cities and take slaves, and now they were here. The ships circled above, then one broke formation. Diving lower, the air crackled, engines roaring, a spotlight cut through the mist, blinding. Bright sweeping across the jungle, Elias dropped to the ground, rifle in hand, though he knew it was useless. The beasts roared louder, some rearing onto their hind legs, claws raking the air. The wounded one pressed closer to Elias, its body trembling not from fear, but from rage. The ship slowed, hovering, its belly opening with a hiss. Elias saw the dark silhouettes of soldiers drop down, armored figures tall and lean with weapons gleaming under the moonlight. They landed, heavy boots crushing the soil, rifles raised, helmets reflecting the glow of the valley. They spread, quickly moving. With the cold precision of hunters, their leader barked orders in a sharp alien tongue. Elias recognized the language, though not the words. It was the voice of the Empire. The pack surrounded, Elias forming a wall of bodies, massive and unyielding. Soldiers advanced, beams of light sweeping, rifles humming with deadly energy. One fired into the air, a crackling bolt that lit up the clearing. The beasts growled but did not charge. Elias's heart hammered. He knew what this was. He had stumbled into the middle of something far larger. These soldiers were not here for him. They were here for the beasts. The leader of the soldiers stepped forward, its armor etched with symbols of rank. Its voice sharp as it shouted again. The beasts answered with a chorus of roars. Elias could feel the tension, like a blade ready to snap. One wrong move, and the clearing would explode into chaos. He glanced at the leader beast, its burning eyes fixed on the soldiers, unmoving, waiting, measuring. Then slowly it looked back at Elias for a moment. Elias could not breathe. The meaning was clear, without words. This was not just their fight. It was his. He had chosen to save the wounded one. He had stood against the trial, and now he stood here at the edge of war. The leader was asking without speech, "Will you stand with Asilius?" Raised his rifle, though his hands shook, his voice low but steady. "I will not run." The wounded beast rumbled beside him, the sound almost like approval. The pack stirred their bodies. Tightening, ready for the strike, the soldiers advanced. Weapons raised, their leader barked a final order, and the night shattered. Bolts of energy cracked through the clearing, trees exploded, soil burst into fire. The beasts roared and charged there, massive bodies colliding with soldiers, claws tearing through armor, fangs crushing weapons. The air filled with screams, both human-like and alien. Elias dropped to the ground, rolled behind a fallen log, and fired his rifle. The bolt struck a soldier square in the chest. The armor smoked as the figure fell. He shifted aim, fired again, clipping another soldier before ducking as a blast scorched the tree beside his head. Battle raged around him, chaos and fury. The beasts moved with savage power, tearing through lines, but the soldiers fought hard, their weapons burning holes through armored hides. Elias saw two beasts fall, their bodies crashing into the soil. Their roars silenced rage burned in him. He fired again and again, moving with the pack as though drawn into their rhythm. The wounded one fought beside him, limping but fierce, its claws sweeping soldiers aside like leaves, its roar shaking the air. The leader beast tore into the enemy with unstoppable force, each strike breaking soldiers apart, but the Empire did not retreat. They pushed harder. More soldiers dropping from the hovering ship, their weapons lighting the jungle in blue fire. Elias's chest tightened. They would not stop. Not until every beast was dead, he shouted. Above the noise, fall back into the trees. Use the cover. His voice cracked, but the beasts seemed to hear him. They shifted, moving back into the jungle, drawing the soldiers into the mist. Elias moved with them, firing, covering their retreat. The wounded one pressed close, shielding him with its massive body blasts, striking its armor, but it pushed on undaunted. The jungle swallowed the fight, trees breaking the enemy's lines. The beasts ambushed from shadows, striking fast, vanishing into fog. Elias used every ounce of training, his shots precise, his movements sharp. He realized the beasts were learning from him, their strikes more coordinated, their movements shifting like soldiers in formation. The Empire soldiers struggled, their discipline faltering in the dark. The fight dragged on until the ship above gave a deep rumble. Engines flaring it began to rise, pulling. Back soldiers scrambling to climb ropes that dangled from its belly. The beasts roared, chasing them, but the leader beast gave a thunderous call, halting them. The pack froze, watching as the ship pulled higher into the clouds, its lights fading into the distance. The jungle fell silent again, the only sound the heavy breaths of beasts and the crackle of fires burning. Through broken Trasilius stood shaking his rifle, hot in his hands, smoke stinging his eyes. Bodies littered the ground, soldiers and beasts alike. The wounded one lowered itself to the earth, groaning. Elias dropped beside it, pressing his hand against its side. "You held on, you stubborn thing," he whispered. The beast's eyes flickered, glowing faint, but steady. The leader approached, its massive form towering over him. Elias stood, though his body ached. His eyes met the glowing fire of the beast, and for a moment neither moved. Then the leader lowered its head close to him. The pack answered with a low, unified rumble. Elias felt the truth heavy in his chest. The choice was no longer his. He had saved one beast, and now an entire pack looked to him. They had been hunted, broken, and he had fought beside them. Now they waited to see what he would do next. Elias's hands trembled, his voice low, but clear. "They will come back stronger. They always do. But if you will fight, I will fight with you." The words hung in the air. The beasts rumbled, answering as one. The leader roared, its voice shaking the stars. Above, the pack thundered in unison, their cries filling the night. Elias stood in the center, rifle in hand, heart pounding. He had crossed the final line. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a commander in a war he never wanted but could no longer escape. The jungle burned in patches of orange glow, the night air filled with a scent of smoke and scorched earth. Elias stood among the beasts, his body trembling from exhaustion but his mind alive with fire. The Empire's soldiers had retreated, yet he knew it was not victory, only delay. They would return with greater force, and they would not stop until every creature in this valley was dead. His hands clenched the rifle tighter. The beasts watched him, their glowing eyes reflecting both trust and expectation. The leader towered before him, silent but unyielding, and the wounded beast lay close at his side. Still alive, still breathing, still watching him with a strange, unspoken bond. Elias moved to the center of the clearing, broken trees and fallen bodies scattered around. He took a deep breath, his voice loud enough to carry, though it shook with wear. "I know what comes next. They will return. They always do. They will not stop, because that is what they are. They are hunters, destroyers. They will burn this world unless we fight together." His words felt strange in his mouth. He was a soldier once, yes, but never had he imagined giving orders to beasts that stood taller than any man. Yet, as his words echoed, the pack growled, their voices blending into one low, thunderous sound. The leader lowered its head just slightly, as though to say, "Continue." Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. He forced himself to steady his voice. "We cannot fight them with strength alone. They have weapon ships, armies, but I know their ways. I know how they think and how they fight. And if you trust me, we can fight them together, not as prey, not as broken pieces of a hunted world, but as one." He looked into their glowing eyes, and in that moment, he realized they were listening, truly listening. The leader roared once, a sound deep and long, shaking the ground. The pack answered in unison, the valley echoing with their fury. Elias felt the roar inside his bones. He knew then his choice was made. He was no longer drifting. He was bound to them, bound to a war not his own, yet more his than anything had ever been. The following days were filled with relentless preparation. Elias worked beside the beasts, guiding them, shaping their raw power into something sharper. He had no machines, no human weapons to give them, only knowledge and instinct, but he used both with every ounce of his being. He showed them how to move as units instead of scattered individuals, how to strike and retreat, how to use the jungle not only as shelter, but as weapon. He marked paths through the trees, places to strike from above, choke points, where their size became advantage traps. Where roots and vines could entangle armored soldiers, the beasts learned faster than he imagined, their minds alien yet sharp. They adapted his lessons, bending them into their own form of strategy, where claws and teeth became blades of war. He watched as the leader demonstrated his commands to the others, moving them in formation roars. signaling advance or retreat signals that grew clearer each day. The wounded beast too, though still limping, refused to be left. Behind it, trained beside him, its movements slower, but filled with determination. Aias's body ached every night. His hands blistered, his lungs burned, but he pressed on. He climbed trees with vines showing how to drop from above. He ran through rivers, teaching how to mask scent and movement. He lay awake at night, mapping in his mind every sound, every shadow, every possibility of the enemy's return. Sometimes when exhaustion nearly broke him, he looked into the glowing eyes of the beasts around him and found strength in their silent trust. They had made him commander not by title, not by word, but by choice. One night, as the twin moons hung high, Elias sat beside the wounded beast, its massive body stretched across the soil, its eyes watching the stars. He spoke quietly, more to himself than to it. "I never asked for this. I never thought I would lead anyone again, let alone you and your kind, but I cannot walk away, not now, not ever." The beast rumbled low, a sound that felt almost like comfort. He placed his hand against its armored hide, and for a moment he felt less alone. The Empire returned sooner than he hoped. The sky burned with the light of their ships, engines tearing through the clouds. Elias heard the distant rumble and knew they were coming. The pack stirred, restless growls, rumbling. The leader roared, summoning them into formation. Elias stood rifle in hand, though he knew it was only a symbol now. His voice rose above the sound, steady, strong, louder than he believed he could speak. "They are here, hold your ground, do not strike until I give the sign. We fight as one." The jungle shook. As ships descended, lights piercing the mist, soldiers dropped again, armored and armed, their leaders shouting sharp commands. But this time, the pack did not rush, they did not scatter, they stood still, a wall of glowing eyes their claws pressed into. The dirt there roars, silent but building. The soldiers hesitated, confused, unused to prey. That did not run. Elias's chest swelled. He raised his hand, holding it firm, then dropped it like a blade. The jungle exploded with fury. The beasts charged not wild, but in waves, their massive bodies crashing into the soldiers' coordinated strikes, tearing into lines. Elias moved with them, his rifle firing precise bursts. Each shot finding its mark, the soldiers faltered, caught between brute strength and strange new discipline. Vines snapped as beasts dropped from trees, crushing enemies beneath their weight. Rivers churned as others dragged soldiers into the depths. Chaos for the Empire, but order for the pack. Elias shouted commands, his voice cutting through the roar. Flank left, draw them into the gorge, hold the ridge, break their line. Every command answered by a thunderous roar and movement sharper than before. The beasts fought not as scattered hunters, but as an army. The Empire's soldiers fell, one by one, their discipline crumbling under the storm. Elias felt alive, his fear burning away, replaced by a fierce clarity. Every choice, every step mattered. He was commander, and they were his army. But the Empire did not break easily. More ships descended, the ground shaking with their weight. Larger machines dropped, massive walkers with weapons, blazing energy bolts cutting through trees. Beasts fell roaring in pain. Elias's heart sank, but he refused to falter. He shouted louder, "Draw them to the cliffs, break the machines' legs, do not fight their guns, fight their weakness." The beasts obeyed, claws tearing at metal joints, teeth ripping cables, sparks. Ow! Flying machines toppled into the abyss, their screams drowned by the roars of victory. Hours stretched into eternity, the battlefield fire and blood. Elias fought until his arms ached, until his voice broke, but still he pressed on. When at last the sky cleared and the remaining ships retreated, dragging what soldiers they could, the jungle fell silent once more. The pack stood bloodied but unbroken, their eyes glowing brighter than before. The leader raised its head and roared, the sound of triumph pure and unshaken. The pack answered, their voices rolling like thunder across the valley. Elias stood among them, chest heaving, his body broken, but his spirit blazing. He had led them into war, and they had followed. He had given them more than survival. He had given them unity. The beasts lowered their heads toward him one by one, a gesture of respect, not demanded, but freely given. Elias felt the weight of it, heavy and unshakable. He whispered more to himself than to them, from savior to leader, "That is what I have become. and now there is no turning. Back the night settled over the battlefield. The fires dying, the stars returning above. Elias sat beside the wounded beast again. Its body scarred, but eyes still fierce. He leaned against its side, staring at the sky. He knew the Empire would come again stronger than ever, but he also knew he would be ready because he was no longer alone. He was commander of an army not of men, but of beasts, and together they would face whatever came their way there. Jungle was quiet, but Elias knew it was not peace. It was only the silence before another storm. The beasts rested their massive bodies, sprawled among the broken trees, their sides rising and falling with heavy breaths, blood still dark on their claws. Smoke from the battle clung to the air, turning the moonlight into a faint haze. Elias sat near the edge of the valley, his rifle across his knees, his eyes locked on the sky because he knew the Empire would not accept defeat. He'd seen them fight too many times to believe otherwise. They always returned with more soldiers, with stronger weapons, with crueler plans. The leader of the beasts stood on a ridge above the valley, its glowing eyes sweeping across the jungle as though guarding every shadow. The wounded beast stayed close to Elias, its breathing deep but steady, its scars glowing faintly under the moonlight. Elias reached out and laid a hand against its armored skin. He whispered low, "They will come back. They will come stronger, and I do not know if we can survive." But the beast gave a low rumble in its chest, a sound that reminded him that doubt was not an option anymore. Days passed in uneasy rhythm. The pack hunted the forest, their movements no longer wild but coordinated. They returned with food for the wounded and for Elias, though he often tried to eat last, letting the beasts take their share first. He spent hours mapping the land in the dirt with sticks, marking ridges, rivers, caves, and gorges. He thought like the enemy, imagining how ships would land where soldiers would march, where machines could break. He spoke his plans aloud to the leader, the wounded beast listening as though it understood his every word. He trained the pack harder each day, teaching them how to strike not only with claws but with timing, how to retreat and circle back, how to scatter and confuse before coming together again. Like a crushing wave, Elias grew thinner, his clothes torn, his face rough with days of unshaven hair, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. The beasts watched him not with pity, but with something close to reverence. The bond between them deepened. Stronger than words, stronger than fear. When he raised his hand, they stilled. When he shouted, they moved. When he bled, they guarded him. One night, as the stars stretched endless across the black sky, Elias felt the ground tremble faintly. He froze, his hand pressed into the soil. It was not the natural quake of earth. It was the rhythm of vengeance far above. The beasts stirred restless growls, rising in their throats. The leader roared once sharp and short, and the pack moved into readiness. Elias stood, his heart pounding, and whispered to himself, "They are here." Again the sky tore open with fire ships descending through clouds, engines screaming, beams of light stabbing into the jungle. Elias felt his stomach knot. These ships were larger, darker, armed with heavier cannons than before. Their hulls bore scars from past battles, but they came relentless, unbroken. The Empire had not sent just soldiers, they had sent war itself. The pack roared, their voices shaking the air. Elias raised his rifle. Though he knew it was small against such force, his voice thundered louder than he thought possible. "Hold. I'll the shadows wait for my signal. Do not break." He moved quickly, leading them into hidden positions among cliffs and thick trees. He placed the strongest on the ridges, where they could strike from above, the swiftest near the rivers, where they could drag enemies into rushing water. The wounded beast he kept close near the valley center, where the fight would be thickest. He whispered to it, "Stay with me no matter what." The first wave came, armored soldiers dropping in lines, their weapons blazing fire, cutting through leaves and soil, but the beasts did not rush. They held as Elias had taught them, silent shadows in the smoke. The soldiers advanced cautious, their leaders shouting orders through metallic speakers. Elias watched their formation, tight, disciplined, but predictable. He clenched his fist and then dropped it. The jungle erupted. The beasts burst from hiding, roaring like thunder, claws tearing into the first line before they could react. Soldiers scattered screams drowned by the fury. Elias fired his rifle, each shot burning through armor, guiding the beasts with sharp shouts. Right side, cut them off. Left side, surround them. Strike hard, pull back, regroup. The soldiers fell, but the Empire pressed more troops from the ships. Their lines never ending. Then the ground shook again, but this time it was worse. The soil split as massive machines descended, towering walkers with cannons glowing and shields humming. Elias cursed under his breath. He shouted to the beasts, "Strike the joints, bring them down, do not face their fire." The beasts obeyed, leaping, clawing, tearing cables from the legs, sparks showering, the jungle explosions booming as one machine toppled into the gorge, the ground shaking with its fall. But more came, each stronger than the last. One machine turned its cannon toward Elias. He dove behind a tree, the blast tearing the ground where he stood, splinters burning his skin. He shouted desperately, "Pull them to the cliffs now, lure them to the fall." The leader roared, its massive body slamming against the machine, forcing it backward. Step by step, Elias scrambled to his feet, firing shot after shot, though his rifle barely scratched the armor. The beast circled, pulling the machine toward the edge vines. Snapped rocks crumbled, then with a roar and one final push, the machine toppled into darkness, vanishing with a thunderous crash. The battle stretched endless. The jungle filled with smoke and blood. The beasts fought with every ounce of fury, but the Empire pressed harder. They unleashed new weapons, swarms of drones buzzing like locusts, lasers cutting through the night. Elias shouted to the beasts, "Strike them from the air, leap, take them down in packs." The swiftest beasts hurled themselves into the sky, jaws snapping, metal wings crushing drones, falling in showers of sparks. The wounded beast fought beside Elias, limping but unyielding, claws raking through soldiers that dared to draw near its body, shielded Elias from blasts more than once. Hours blurred into chaos. Elias's voice cracked, but still he shouted. Still he commanded, his heart hammering, his body burning, yet he refused to fall. At last, when the sky began to pale with dawn, the Empire ships pulled back, retreating again, leaving behind burning wreckage and broken machines. The jungle fell into silence, broken only by the heavy breaths of the beasts. Elias dropped to his knees, his rifle falling from his hands, his chest heaving. He had survived again. They all had. The beasts gathered around, their bodies scarred, but their eyes burning bright. The leader approached, lowering its massive head to Elias, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Elias reached out, resting his hand on its armored face, his voice hoarse but steady. "We held them. We stood and we broke them again. But they will not stop." He looked across the valley at the rising sun and felt the weight of the war pressing heavy on his shoulders. "They will keep coming until either we are gone or they are gone." The wounded beast pressed closer, leaning against him. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, feeling its strength steady and unshakable. He whispered, "We are not done. Not yet. The battle may have been over, but the war had only just begun." The days after were filled with restless work. The pack rebuilt what was broken, clearing trees for new paths, digging trenches, fortifying cliffs. Elias drove them harder than ever, his voice sharp, his eyes burning, though his body trembled with exhaustion. He knew the Empire would not wait long. The beasts followed without question, their loyalty absolute, their trust unshaken. Each day, Elias grew more certain that his place was here among them, not as a stranger, not even as a savior, but as their commander. At night, when the stars shone above and the jungle lay still, Elias sat beside the wounded beast, speaking his thoughts aloud. "The Empire will bring more, not just soldiers, not just machines, but worse weapons, things I have seen before, things I thought no one should ever face." He paused, his eyes distant. "But we will face them together, and we will not fall," the beast rumbled, low in agreement, as though echoing his vow. Though the jungle rested, though the fires died, Elias knew the truth. The next storm was already building far above in the black sea of stars, and when it came, it would test not only his strength or the beast's fury, but the bond they had forged together. A bond that might be the only hope against an empire that would never stop until they were all dust. The night was heavy with silence. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was still. Elias sat alone near the edge of the cliff, looking out at the valley below. The beasts slept in shadows, their massive bodies rising and falling in slow rhythm. The fires of the last battle had burned out, leaving behind blackened earth and broken metal, but the sky above glowed faintly with streaks of light. Distant ships moving among the stars. Elias knew they were not traders, not explorers. They were scouts watching, marking, waiting for the next strike. His body ached with every movement, his hands raw from work, his mind sharp but tired. He whispered into the still air, "They will not stop. They are only waiting to bring something worse." The wounded beast stirred nearby, its glowing eyes opening to watch him. Elias felt its gaze heavy and grounding. He placed his hand against its armored side and breathed out slow. "Together, we can hold, but I do not know for how long." Next morning, the beasts rose restless, their heads lifting, their growls echoing low across the valley. Elias felt it too, a pressure in the air, a hum in the ground. Something was coming, not like before, not soldiers or machines, but something larger. He moved through the pack, speaking to each one, his voice steady, though his heart pounded stronger than ever. "Today, you must hold. Today, you must fight, not just for me, not just for this valley, but for every life that still breathes free." He pointed toward the sky where clouds swirled unnaturally. "They are bringing their greatest weapon." The sun vanished as shadows spread. A massive ship broke through the clouds dark, and endless, its hull larger than mountains, its cannons glowing like suns. Elias froze for a moment, his chest tight. This was no ordinary warship. This was a destroyer, meant not for conquest but for erasure. It hovered above the jungle, blotting out the light, its engines roaring so loud the earth shook. Trees bent under the force. The beasts raised their heads and roared back, their voices defiant, but Elias knew sound alone could not stop this. The ship opened its belly and light poured down. Drones swarmed in black clouds, thousands of them, their wings cutting through the air, their weapons glowing. Elias shouted orders, his throat raw. "Scatter, strike from the air, do not cluster. Keep moving." The beast leapt, claws tearing through the sky, snapping metal wings, sparks raining down. But for every drone destroyed, 10 more poured from the ship above. The sky itself became a storm of fire. Then the first cannon fired a beam of burning light, cutting through the forest. In a single instant, trees turned to ash, soil melted into glass. The beasts roared in fury. Elias screamed, "Move them to the cliffs. Do not let them stay open, spread out." He dashed through the chaos, his rifle firing, though the bullet seemed useless against the endless swarm. The leader of the beasts roared, shaking the air. It charged forward, its massive body slamming into the horde, tearing drones apart with claws and teeth. Elias watched as it fought like a storm itself, but even it staggered under the sheer weight of enemies. The wounded beast stayed close to Elias, shielding him from blasts, its body glowing faintly as though its scars burned with strange energy. Elias pressed his hand to it, whispering, "We need more than claws, more than teeth. We need something greater." He looked back at the massive ship, shadow swallowing everything, and in that instant he made a decision. He shouted above the chaos, "Their leader, their commander, their destroyer, we must bring it down. Not just the soldiers, not just the machines, but the ship itself." The beasts roared as though they understood his words. Elias pointed toward the cliffs, the old gorge where the earth split deep and endless. "If we can pull it low, if we can force it down, we can end this," he knew. The risk was madness, but madness was the only path left. The battle raged. Elias moved with the beasts, guiding them toward the gorge they fought through. Waves of drones, each step bought with blood and fire. The leader beast carved a path, its massive claws tearing machines apart. Elias shouted, every breath a command, every shout a call to survive. Finally they reached the cliffs, the gorge yawning, below endless darkness waiting. Elias raised his rifle, firing into the sky, taunting the destroyer, "Come down, come closer, face Usta." The ship shifted as if answering his challenge, its cannons glowing brighter engines, lowering its shadow, stretching longer. Across the valley, the ground shook with its weight. The beasts attacked in unison, leaping, striking, dragging drones into the gorge, their roars shaking stone itself. Elias shouted, "Now pull it down, strike the engines, the weak points." The wounded beast leapt higher than Elias had ever seen, its claws raking across the glowing core of an engine, sparks exploding, fire raining from the sky. The destroyer shuddered, tilting its balance, failing. The leader beast roared and slammed ground sending shockwaves that cracked the cliffs. Elias stumbled, but his eyes burned as he saw the ship dip lower, closer. Almost within reach, he shouted again. Harder, louder, with everything he had. Push it now. All of you together. The beasts surged, their massive bodies throwing themselves forward, claws tearing at engines, tails smashing metal armor. Drones swarming but falling under the relentless storm of fury. The destroyer groaned, metal shrieking as if the sky itself was breaking the gorge. Split wider rocks falling into endless dark. The destroyer tilted further beams, firing wildly into the jungle, cutting earth and stone. Elias barely dove aside as fire seared past his face. The wounded beast roared, its body blazing with strange light. As if its scars had awakened power, it hurled itself into the heart of the destroyer claws, tearing deep into glowing metal, ripping wires and cores. The ship screamed its engines, exploding one after another, until finally, with a roar like the death of a star, the destroyer collapsed into the gorge, its vast body tearing into the earth, shaking the valley as it fell. Fire lighting the sky until it was gone. Silence followed, only the crackle of flames and the heavy breath of the surviving beasts. The jungle broken, the cliffs torn, the sky slowly clearing. Elias stood trembling, his rifle hanging at his side, his body weak, his ears ringing. He looked around the valley, scorched but alive. The beasts gathered their bodies, scarred, their eyes fixed on him. The leader lowered its head and let out a low rumble, not of anger, but of respect. Elias felt it deep in his chest. The wounded beast returned, limping, its body still glowing faintly. With strange light, it pressed its massive head against Elias. Almost gently, he placed his hand on it, his voice hoarse but steady. We did it. We broke their greatest weapon. But his eyes turned toward the sky, and his voice grew harder. They will come again. They will never stop, not until they are forced to. And now they know we are not prey. We are their enemy. The beasts roared together, their voices rolling across the broken land. Elias stood among them, no longer just a man, no longer only a savior. He was their leader, their commander, bound not by chains, but by trust, by battle, by blood. The empire would return, but so would they, stronger, fiercer, unbroken. And when the stars burned with war again, Elias knew he would not face it alone. He would face it with the beasts who now followed him, not as monsters, but as brothers in arms,